Hi everyone and welcome along. Today we're going to paint a lovely autumnal wreath featuring loads of my seasonal favourites. So grab your paints and let's get started. So to start the wreath you want a pencil circle. I used a compass, but you could draw around a little plate or a dish, but yeah, a compass is a really useful starting point. And then I'm going to just give myself a little bit of a guide. I'm going to paint some acorns to start off with, so I'm just going to give, like I say, a little guideline there, but I'm just going to sort of start painting and enjoy the process and talk you through each of the stages as we go. It's an opportunity to have like a mini tutorial on a few things. So I've got some green gold mixed up here, and then we've got burnt sienna up here, which are good colours for acorns. So let's begin. So I'm going to start by drawing in a sort of U-shaped cup and just filling that in with water, and that forms the base of my acorn. So I'll pop another one of those in here. I love green gold. I think it's a really fantastic colour. It's a colour that's not so regularly sort of in people's palettes. I might pop another acorn in just there. So you can start with your pencil lines, but then, you know, however your fancy takes you. And now I'm going to move on to a slightly smaller brush, a 3/10. It's all very much a personal choice, your brush choices. But what I'm going to do whilst this is still wet is just create a lovely little bit of a woody blend into those acorns, whilst also just maybe making the branch a little bit gnarly. And then we'll have some oak leaves as well. So oak leaves we have actually done on tutorials before, but if I draw in the pencil line just to give us a slightly extended shape there, and I'm going to take green gold and I'm going to begin with a nice loop at the top. Again, nice and wet, and then I'm just going to create nice sort of soft curves coming out the side. Having that central line is so handy for shaping the direction of the oak leaf, especially when it's the kind of shape that you're adding all these loops on the side to. It could be very easy to lose your way a bit with the look of it. And then I'm going to take a bit of brown, just drop that in the base as well, and then it's up to you really. You could add a bit of cadmium yellow up to the top. It's very much got the sort of greeny warm feel of the seasons changing with an acorn. And then I've got some yellow ochre just here. I'm going to finish off my acorn by creating this U shape. I like a bit of unpainted space there, and then a bit of the shadowy brown just at the top there. This is a really lovely, quite sort of therapeutic painting session, I think. Just going nice and slowly round the wreath, painting in our favourite things from autumn, and using lots of wet on wet techniques to just enjoy watching the colours blend into one another. So I've placed in some acorns around the wreath where I wanted them, and now I'm going to move on to some apples. So I've drawn in 2 sort of rough circle shapes, and I want to keep the circle as my main guide, so I'm going to just sort of create a bit of a branch, maybe a leaf or 2, and then I'm going to get painting. So popped in that leaf there, so I know that sort of comes down over the top of the apple, because now I'm going to paint in the apple colours, and I'd love to do a nice sort of rosy red apple. So we'll start with that. So I'm going to start sort of quite gently colouring in this area here. I want to shine on the apple, so I'm going to leave a little bit of unpainted space. With watercolour, it's all about starting nice and light and then building up your colours. So I want a bit of a golden glow on these apples as well. So there's a bit of yellow ochre in there, and then I'll go back to my cadmium red and just gently build up the colour from around the edges, making the most of that nice wet on wet. And I'll do the same with my larger apple here. You could absolutely use a larger brush. I'm just keen to have as much control as possible on this shape. But that does mean I have to work quite fast, and I'm really utilising the side, the sort of angling the brush down low, using the side of it to get as much coverage as possible with the bristles. And just allow that red to seep in on its own. You don't need to be disturbing it too much. And then, whilst we're just allowing that to dry, we'll begin another gnarly little branch. So that stalk is going to come down in there. Have one coming off up there. And then here I'll just allow that to dry a little bit. It is all about timings with this. So the greens, I'm going to get a slightly fresher green here, a bit of sap green, but I have mixed it in with the green gold. And again, I'm going to use a smallish brush just to keep the control, and you can still get a really amazing broadness with even one of your smaller brushes. Just about got away with that. So for all these leaves at the moment, we're leaving them in a fairly simple state. They haven't got much detail on them yet, but we will be going back over round the wreath and picking out areas where we can add in some detail. But for now, it's all about the wet on wet. Okay, so we're going to fill in apples around the wreath. So the next thing I'm going to put in is a few mushrooms. I absolutely adore painting mushrooms, and I've got a few tutorials on them, but I'm just going to draw in a few little shapes. Put one in, starting to sort of have have to think a little bit more about where I'm gonna pop them in. But it's nice to sort of celebrate all things autumn because there's just so much going on. So I've just got a little cluster here. If you are keen to have a go at sort of painting mushrooms a little bit more in depth, you can have a look in my Flowers and Foliage playlist at some mushrooms, some mushroom tutorials. But for now, I'm going to paint in some sort of slightly simple, slightly sort of fanciful mushrooms, I suppose. So I'll start with a nice yellow ochre, and I'm just going to fill in, but not at 100%. A little bit of unpainted space can be quite nice. And in fact, maybe just a drop of shadow is always helpful too. These nice sort of shadowy tones can be very useful. We'll paint this one in as well. So don't worry too much about the sort of the transition from stalk to that mushroom, because we can always pop in some leaves, some bits and pieces. But we've got our stalks in, and now we can think about the lovely sort of mushroom cups on top. And I'm going to begin with painting in a sort of palish red one, because we can add some nice spots and details, but I want to keep the colour scheme fairly consistent. So we've got the red in the apples, and now we've got it in a first layer there, and I'll play around with some orange tones as well. But again, we've got a rounded shape here, so we do an outline and then clean off the brush and just blend it in a little bit, and having a lighter inner and a deeper, darker outer edge just helps with the roundness. Now, whether you do it creating unpainted space like that, or if you've got a light wash, and then we can add more colour to the sides and top, and don't worry too much about underneath, we can just blend that in and make it part of it. We're sort of getting ahead of ourselves here, but hey ho. So yeah, I'm just going to fill these in with some colour, and then we can allow them to dry and put some detail on them. The last detailed shape or key piece I'm going to pop in is a maple leaf. And so to paint a maple leaf, we need a sort of star shape to begin, to get our key points of the leaf. And there it goes, and we can have, well, they just sort of pop in and out. Let's have one up here. So just start with your main points, and then you can just sort of play around with how many points you give each star. Yeah, it's funny, at this point we start to sort of go, oh, well, everything's a bit big to squeeze in, but you can still find places to sort of overlap and place things in underneath. Maple leaves have always been something that I like to properly draw in full first, just because they can be quite confusing. You can sort of get a bit lost with them, and then it's lovely as you colour them in, essentially you can really play around with the lovely blends. So I started with a nice yellowy orange, and now I'm going to introduce some red. and enjoy blending it all together. Again, I'm using quite a small brush. I've got my 3/10 brush here, and it's all down to being able to have a nice amount of control for all these little points on the maple leaf. So I'm just going to fill in all my maple leaves, and then I've got one last little thing to add in, which is a really fantastic filler to close up all the little gaps, and then we can just add detail and we'll be done. This is really starting to look lovely and full, but the last thing I love to add into any wreath is some berries or sprigs of berries, little filler plants, and it just means that you can fill up all sorts of gaps with lovely little berries. And I think what might be quite nice is to get some Alizarin Crimson in the mix, because that is a lovely colour, and I think it'll be a lovely complement to this wreath. So how do we do the berries? Well, squish down a very small brush into a C curve and then come round into a circle, leaving that little bit of unpainted space, and lo and behold, you've got a little shine on your berry. Now, you don't have to paint in your stem first. You could always just sort of go, right, I want some berries here in a little cluster, and then you can decide afterwards whether you need to actually have stems joining it to everything. So I'm going to look around the wreath now to find areas which could benefit from maybe a little bit of filling out. Maybe there's a gap or two, and just pop in some berries. It's nice and easy. And then once we've got all those painted in, we can go round adding detail, adding in little branches or stalks that we haven't yet put in, and we'll be good to go. Everything's now dry, and that's also an opportune moment to go and rub out any pencil that's still lurking there. Okay, so this is the fun bit. Well, for me, I absolutely love adding in little bits of detail. So I'm going to go round the wreath, and so we've got little things like we can add in little leaf lines to the oak leaves. So I'm just using a rather concentrated mixture of some of the Sap Green in with my shadow mix, and a nice thin line poking into the nice sort of rounded shapes. Then we've got other leaves which we can do with a fairly similar approach. Apple leaves have slightly more detail going on. Should always start with that thin line. So there we are, we've got leaves, and then we've got our maple leaf, and what I want to do is do the detail in a dark warm colour. So I've got my Alizarin Crimson there, and handily the pencil from marking out those leaves earlier is exactly what I need. And then just with an even sort of lighter touch of the brush, little leaf veins going out there. So let's get all the leaves marked in. Okay, as we move on round, we've got our apples that could just have maybe a little bit more detail, just in the ruby russet colour. So I'm just adding some stronger cadmium red. I quite like that slight dry brushed effect that comes. And there's another one. Oops, got my hand in it. Oh well, never mind. Just clean my hand off with a bit of water. We're all good. And also, again, I can take a clean wet brush and that does get rid of it quite well. All the tips. Right, let's get onto our mushrooms, shall we? So I am going to pop in some nice sort of marks and dots onto this mushroom. And then underneath, just with a bit of shadow, some little lines emanating out. And then we could do the same over here, but with some different colours. That little bit of shadow underneath. But always soften it down with a clean wet brush. And that little sundial effect is coming out from the middle. And then if you can't see that underneath, then you just need a little bit of shadow. And then of course maybe some more speckles on the top of your mushrooms. Now all I need to do is add the stalks onto the berries and have one last look. We're in the last stage, wow. And all I'm doing now is just using some of the shadow to just add little lowlights and details to some of the branches, maybe extend some of the branches that just need a little bit extra. But yeah, I think we're pretty much there. And it's worth mentioning that this wreath is full of quite large items, and a wreath can be really quite a time-consuming thing if you start off really small. I've definitely learnt that lesson in the past, and I find myself here like 3 hours later trying to paint things. So if you go for these slightly larger items, I'm just going to pop a little bit of shadow in some of these bits, you'll find that you can just sort of achieve a lot more in the time. Can't resist a little bit of shadow sometimes. Who am I kidding? All the time I love shadow. So I'm just going very diluted just around my wreath, finding the areas where we might have a little bit. And there you have a lovely autumn wreath. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that one. I want to say a huge thank you to my patrons for their support, because that support enables me to keep creating these videos that everyone can enjoy. And if you enjoyed it, then hit the like button and comment below to let me know how you got on with that one. And of course, if you subscribe and hit that little notification bell, then you'll never miss another video. Until next time, bye!